In our last discussion video, we talked about the paradox. And of course, within the paradox, money is not the medium of exchange as it is in our social setting. The currency within the paradox instead are actions and gestures brought forth from intent. These represent the fair value. Essentially, intent is the denomination, for the intent behind the actions and gestures are seen, known, and attended by intercessors of the paradox. In the paradox, if you look backwards through time, long and far enough, with unbending intent, you can then know the future. For instance, do you remember significant events in your life at the age of 10? Or how about 5 or perhaps even 1? Through grace or effort, you are functionally capable of knowing your incepting events even before you were born, even before the womb. It was then that you gave your word. It was from then, within nature, that the Word became flesh. As a new being, you were ushered into the future, tasked with a specific purpose as a sacred result of the first agreement. And in this video discussion, we're going to talk about the nature of being here. But before we do that, I want to just make a brief comment about awareness and awakening. Now, awareness is precipitated by knowledge. Knowledge, of course, comes from knowing something, but just knowing it doesn't mean that you're necessarily aware of it. To be aware of something, you have to internalize it. You have to feel it. Knowing something, you can think it, but being aware of it is something that you can feel. You internalize it and take it in to the very core of your being. Once you've done that, then you are aware. But awareness itself is not awakening. To be awakened from or with this awareness, you actually have to then live it. And this living awareness is what becomes the awakening. Once you're living the awakening, awareness does not end. Awareness, in the gathering awareness, for us is a perpetual, a constant, and an ever-occurring situation. So I just wanted to make that brief comment, and now we want to get into the nature of our being, or maybe more precisely, of our being here. So what are we doing here? Do we happen to inhabit the one planet of billions and billions that singularly is the one that supports life? Is this a coincidence, an accident, or is there something unique and special, again, such as intent? Could there be some reason for our being here? That's an age-old question. Is there something that makes sense of life on this spinning earth, this spinning domicile in the middle of space? And could it be something natural? Something perhaps as natural as an appendage or as basic as an instinct, yet buried deep within us like a long-forgotten memory. And as such, that something that is hidden, buried deep within us, beyond the reach of logical thought, requires our most superior use of the tools that we have, in particular patience and persistence. And then this will follow the path that we just talked about. What we just discussed here, this is knowing it. But to become aware of it, you have to feel it, and feel it to your core. And then once you can feel it, then you have to live it. It may seem confusing or baffling, almost like magic, but remember, magic is where a trick is simple, though the presentation is baffling. The beauty itself we might find in the simplicity, which we could say rests on the edge of Occam's razor, which is just a simple physics term describing a situation where the simple solutions that answer all the questions are usually the more likely to be correct. And this, by our nature, is where a momentary flash of awareness that seems insoluble now becomes more clearly understood. However, there's something within us, some type of agency within us that really riles against anything that equates our own being with simplicity. It's just perhaps an ego thing. Certainly, we're too important. We just cannot be simple. We have to hold a position that's, defined and identified by the complexity of its value. And it has to be one that defies explanation. It's so noble and it's so mysterious. And what keeps us in that cage of unknowing? Well, it's our most trusted agent, reason. It serves as our supposedly ultimate protector. It's to the core, it's loyal, it's true, it's hard. But we know now that reason will betray us because many efforts, many thoughts, many of us have fallen where reason promised to stand guard. As an example, centuries ago, our Earth was considered to be at the center of the universe, and all the celestial bodies accordingly moved around us. Everyone believed and agreed on this piece of social fabric. Well, not everyone. Not the scholar, his physician, translator. He was a governor, a diplomat, economist. He was an astronomer, a mathematician, and that person was Nicholas Copernicus. Copernicus explained away the fallacy of a central Earth, and then he published his findings. Later, Galileo Galilei promoted the Copernican concept, and for this, he was sentenced to house arrest for life. Essentially, he was guilty of some kind of heresy for suggesting that, our rightful position wasn't in the central station of the universe. Of course, the problem was it conflicted with mathematics and scientific observation. And when we removed the stumbling blocks of our biases, that simple correction, which removed us egocentrically from the center of the universe, then everything fell neatly into place. And it's only a slight variation of this same simple point of misinterpretation that also precludes us from perceiving our purpose. It's as though that we must see our purpose through a self-serving lens. We feel that we must be the central reason for being and not simply part of a larger purpose. Our egos cannot accept that such a concept. Yet, sadly, this is the straitjacket of reason from which it's our challenge to escape. So here we are, going through life. We're right in the middle of things. We're after birth, we're before death, we're right in the middle. And naturally, it's a little overwhelmingly difficult to figure out a complete explanation of anything when that explanation itself has to start in the middle rather than at the beginning or the end. But in this case, for this discussion, we're just going to assume the liberty of starting from the beginning or the end. And in this case, we're going to start at the end and work our way towards our current position. We can look at death as the end. It may not be the easiest place to begin, but we'll soon see it lends itself to a reasonable process. That is, it's reasonable in the sense that if we don't know why we die, we can't know how to live properly. It's equivalent to if you had a job and you didn't know what the final conclusion of your efforts in that job were to be, and nobody told you what the objective was or what it was that you were trying to accomplish by your activities, you wouldn't know what activities to perform, at least not correctly. But our accumulated knowledge and our awarenesses from functioning in this reality allow us to begin to connect the dots of the meaning of our living and life as we know it. Now, if we looked at the end, perhaps in a more religious sense or a Christian sense, we could say that just in general, very generalized, that it is to God that we go upon death. But in a fully functioning and separate reality that exists, God then would be the next link to us. Then on the other side of that link would be God again, in a yet another fully functioning reality of yet another dimensional link, and so it goes on and on. Worlds, realities without end, in an internal link of which God would be described as the beginning and the end of each link of realities, the alpha and omega of sorts, the first link and the last. So more accurately to us, it appears that there's no end to this chain. And so it is life without end. But in the here and now, we only need to concern ourselves with the very next reality. And it is from here which we want to begin. In the beginning, the very beginning, even before the womb, before we are incepted, we were just a critical fragment of intelligent energy without awareness. This beginning was in a functioning reality outside our own. It is in this beginning that we were given a choice, the choice of whether or not we would choose to experience and endure this three-dimensional reality for the purpose of nurturing and returning a fruitful awareness. But before continuing here, just in a brief aside, at this juncture, it's important to know whether we have an awareness of this beginning reality. Of course, we can exist, and many, if not most, do live their lives in this three-dimensional separate reality, devoid of the knowledge that there was ever any choice to accept this request, even though by us being here, it's obvious we did, and we're witness to that sheer fact. This was our first agreement. And while we still make other agreements, which we'll get into later, it's critically important to acknowledge, if possible, and even only if in good faith, that we made this choice, though we may be one of the many without the memory of it. Remember how knowledge to awakening works, which we talked about earlier. This is a knowing. This is acquiring the knowledge. The next step after a period of time, and who knows how long or under what processes it will come. But then once this is, so to speak, meditated on for long enough, then we suddenly become aware of it. And that awareness is a feeling. It's internal. It's in our core. And then, of course, once we have that awareness, then that can percolate into a living of the situation. So, in other words, once this is understood as a voluntary, chosen participation, we can orient ourselves with the first critically important characteristic. And that characteristic is simply that we accept full and complete responsibility for everything that happens in our life. We accept this responsibility because we come to understand that everything that happens in our life is for our specific awareness, because this is a journey we agreed to take on, and each and every event is part of that journey. Moreover, we are completely responsible for nurturing our awareness from these events and circumstances which happen within the limitations of our three-dimensional journey. Everyone's journey is different, though, because each person's awareness is unique. It's from this perspective that we oriented our beginning, choosing to be with the precise parents, place, and time we've accepted to embark on the task of our journey. It's critical that we do not take on the false belief, that we are participating in a system in which we did not choose, as the choice was entirely ours from the very beginning, and now we want to proceed with it. For this is our purpose in being here, and so this is part one in the nature of our being here. In the next video, we'll take up from where we left off here with part two. So until then, I wish you peace, comfort,